All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we doing a preview and prediction for the 2022 Tennessee Volunteers. A year makes, Nick, for Tennessee. We said this about Michigan, too. 1 minute Michigan fans are calling for Jim Harbaugh's head. 12 months later, he's in the playoffs. Similar with Tennessee, 12 months prior, there was, less than that, really. There was a lot of uncertainty with the program. They bring in Josh Heupel, who was kind of a questionable hire, but it seems like they kind of had no choice with Jeremy Pruitt's firing when it happened. He comes in, goes 7-6 in his first season. Tim Banks does good work with the defense. Alex Golish at OC, he was impressive as well. His third year now with Heupel. What do you make of Josh Heupel's first season and the future for Tennessee after some really gloomy uncertainty? And I wasn't even a big believer in him at first, but it seems like it's really working, more so than just on the offensive side of the ball.
Right, when you look at Tennessee after that 2019-2020 season where they started off really poor, they turned around, rattled off a bunch of wins, ended up in a bowl game, beat Indiana. It seemed like Pruitt was on top of the world. It seemed like Tennessee was heading in the right direction. Then it kind of all falls apart for him, and then all the recruiting violations and all that stuff kind of adds up. Then Pruitt finds himself out the door, and next thing you know, they bring in Heupel, who a lot of people, they weren't sold on him in his time at UCF. There were some question marks there. He comes in. I liked the hire at first. I thought it was a bit different. I thought it was interesting. A lot of people had some interesting things to say about it, but he ends up 7-6 first season, which is like a solid season considering the roster he inherited and the kind of work he has to do. I think he has his team trending in the right direction. I don't know if it's necessarily competing in the East right now, but I think they're heading in the right direction to head towards that.
This team has great potential due to how poor they were in certain areas last year, like the O-line and the secondary. They still won 7 games. That's why this team has so much hype. People expect them to compete in the East this year. I don't blame them. Look at this offense. Nearly 3 plays per minute last year. The tempo was insane. That's a big reason why this experiment with Heupel has worked so well in such a short time, is because he comes and implements this system. And I think they can get even better because last year, I don't know, I didn't watch every single game, so I don't know if they looked tired at all. But I know fatigue was probably certainly an issue in terms of depth last year because, this is a new system they implemented in a short time. I think that they're going to be much more conditioned this year, and the system's going to be able to flow much smoother than it did last year. Hendon Hooker comes over from Virginia Tech. It was very questionable for him to stay. It's very shocking that he stayed after the Pruitt controversy. It seemed like he was wasting his talents. I was kind of upset that he decided to stay there, but Heupel comes around. He stuck by them. They stuck by him. And it worked out great for the pair. So I like what happened last year with Hooker. I did not expect this type of season. He's a dual threat guy that never really impressed with his arm at Virginia Tech, but last year he did. A 31-3 TD to INT ratio. That's incredibly staggering. The decision-making was good. Ball placement has come a long way. Touch and consistency, accuracy as well were kind of some struggle areas. Still, he nearly had 3K yards passing. Very excited for his second year under Heupel. And, of course, the toughness he showcased was top-notch. I think the sky is the limit for Hooker here in year 2.
I love Hendon Hooker. I love how they trusted him in Knoxville. They stayed with him. He trusted the program. He stayed there as well. Had a strong season. 31 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, which is an incredible number for him. Over 3,500 total yards for him. The dual threat is certainly what I love about him. 600 yards on the ground last year and 5 touchdowns. Solid from him. And the completion percentage, 68%. The guy is slinging it and completing his passes. I love what he can do. I love the decision making. I think he's the perfect quarterback to lead this Tennessee offense. And there's a reason why a lot of people have him in their top 3, 4, 5 SEC quarterbacks.
6'4", 218. He's slimmed down a bit from when he was at VT. Still a big, tough runner. Good runner as well. He's not, the fastest, but he uses that size certainly. And he's very smart with his runs as well. They like to get him involved. Looking at the running back game, though, they lose Tyon Evans. He transfers over to Louisville. They get back the lead rusher in Jabari Small, though. He had 792 yards on the ground, 9 touchdowns, 5.6 yards per carry. Jalen Wright and Lenef Whitehead, they're both rising sophomores. They're pretty efficient last year. I like this running game. They averaged 217 yards per game last year, which is a pretty staggering amount. You think they can live that up? Because I think they have a pretty deep backfield, but no one really blows you away at first glance in terms of talent. But I think, everyone, they get them involved and they make an impact. 4.9 yards per carry as a team last year. So I like this running game. I don't know if they'll get better, but I expect them to certainly do so, especially when you look at what's going to go on with the offensive line.
I like Jabari Small a lot. I think he's a consistent back, sort of an underrated back in the SEC, nearly 800 yards on the ground last year, 5.6 yards per carry, and 9 touchdowns. Plus, he had 9 receptions as well. Maybe he can be involved in the passing game a little bit. I love what he can do. I think Jabari Small is a super talented back. A lot of people are not really noticing that, but I also think that Wright and Whitehead also add a sort of different dynamic with these 3 backs, that all 3 of them can do different things for the team if they need to be played in different roles. I think Wright's a solid guy, 400 yards on the ground last year, 4.8 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns. I like to see him involved early on in the season.
people are very excited for this offense because of the passing game, because of course we just mentioned Hendon Hooker, but the receivers you have to work with. Cedric Tillman, he had 200 yards versus Georgia, a little north of 1,000 yards. That was the first time receiver eclipsed that mark in over a decade. Justin Hunter in 2012 was the last one to do so. He also had 12 touchdowns, 6'3", 215, has the ability to climb the ladder, has some strong hands. I like Tillman. He's one of the top, more underrated pass catchers coming back in college football. Jalen Hyatt, solid slot option. Very similar numbers for him the past 2 years. 20 catches in 2020, 21 this past season. 200-plus yards in both years. Looking for that production to take the next step, though, this fall as he enters his third year. And then Brew McCoy, former five-star, has transferred more times than touchdowns he's scored. 3 different schools, only 2 touchdowns. I like the respect. This is a very respectable starting trio. They lose 2 of their top 3 wide receivers. All the 3 names I just mentioned, they're going to play key roles this year. But depth is not something I'm exactly having faith in. Jimmy Callaway's the 3rd leading returning wide receiver, only had 5 grabs in 3 games, so quite young at wide receiver. I think Callaway's going to make an impact in their second group, but how do you feel about this receiving core? Because I'm kind of iffy on it, even though they have some potential in the starting rotation.
The depth is certainly not there. I definitely get a little concerned about the depth, but I really do like Cedric Tillman. I think he's super underrated in the grand scheme of things. Over 1,000 yards last year, 16.9 yards per catch, and 12 total touchdowns for him. Really talented wide receiver. And I love Hyatt. Perfect in the slot there. I think that's really where he belongs. I like to see him in that wide receiver Y role. I think it's a solid spot for him. He hit it with the 21 and 20 catches of the past 2 years. Maybe he gets to 30, 40 this year and starts to have a bigger impact this year, especially early on in the season. I like his yards per catch, 10.8, solid wide receiver. I think that he's solid. I just get a little concerned about the depth. I think it's just not there. Callaway, I don't really know what we've seen from him in only 3 games. Is he going to be able to take a step forward and be that number 4 guy that they need? I just don't know if that's possible.
I was kind of shocked they didn't attack the transfer portal more. They had Isaiah Neor, a deep threat, locked up from Wyoming. He ended up flipping to Texas, so that was obviously a big, crucial loss. I was very excited for his potential in this offense, but he's going to end up doing big things for Texas, so good for him. But I'm not overly cautious, because of Princeton Fant, Jacob Warren. They both had 16-plus grabs each last year at tight end, 2 seniors, so I'm not overly worried just because they have those 2 veterans there that they'll get involved, certainly. I think this passing game, they're going to be in good shape. I think Hooker will eclipse 3,000 yards, which hasn't been done since Tyler Bray. I think that was also a decade ago. So, overall, what are your thoughts on this passing attack? Do you think it's going to be better or worse?
I think definitely having Hooker helps. I think he's a super talented quarterback. He's going to find the space for his guys. He's going to make plays for them to help them out. I think the tight ends will be involved early on, especially. I like Fant a lot. I think he's a super talented tight end. He has a lot of potential this year. I like his size, redshirt senior. Love the experience he has. I like to see him involved early on and get a lot of catches. He had 16 grabs last year, 220 yards, good for 13.8 yards per catch. I like to see him step that up, maybe get to around 25, 30 grabs this year.
Now looking at the offensive line, 4 of the 5 starters are back up front, which, I think that's good news for a team that ranked 124th in the nation in sacks allowed. Hooker really had to gut it out at times last year. 3 names I'm really eyeing. Former 5-star Darnell Wright at left tackle. He's a surefire starter there. Jerome Calvin, he's a super senior at guard. And Cooper Mays, they hope to get him back and healthy this year. He's going to anchor down the center spot. The O-line needs to be better overall, and I think it will. But last year, this was certainly an area that really plagued this offense, and they still had that much success despite their offensive line really not being that good.
Hoping Cooper Mays can play to his full potential, because I think the depth at center is a little concerning. Addison Nichols, a freshman, potentially would step in there if Cooper Mays isn't really getting the job done or struggles with injuries. But I think Darnell Wright's really solid at right tackle, and he's an interesting guy to watch in the SEC this year. Has some serious potential.
Looking at the Volunteers defense, I think Tim Banks did everything he could with what they had last year. I think this defense certainly overachieved, but that's not saying a lot. They certainly still struggled. 6 starters are back, though, on a unit that was quite the liability last season. As you could have guessed, though, the defense was on the field a lot. It's one of the back draws of having this type of offense that moves fast and rarely is on the field of how fast they score or go 3-and-out with the pace. 4th most plays in college football, 1,010. That's a lot for your defense. They allowed 420 yards per game, though. That's actually a pretty solid mark, I think, for being on the field that much. Run defense was not bad. They did allow 24 touchdowns, though, on the ground, 3.7 yards per carry. Solid mark, but the yards per game mark compared to the year prior certainly shifted back a little bit. I give them credit since they saw 40 carries per game as a defense. They certainly need the progressive, Nick. I look at this defensive line. They lost Matthew Butler and some key depth on the interior, but Omari Thomas, 6'4", 320, Latrell Bumpus, he's going to be those 2 guys are probably going to slot into the starting lineup. Dejon Terry, Elijah Simmons, they should play a key role as well. In terms of classification, the roster is pretty deep on the interior D-line. Same can't be said for defensive end spots, though. Tyler Barron and Byron Young, these are 2 guys that circled last year, and I'd say they shined pretty well. Young was a JUCO guy. He did most of his damage in the back half of the year. Ended the season with 46 stops, 11.5 tackles for loss. 5.5 sacks. And then Barron, he's a much stronger player. He had 7 tackles for loss. Flirted with the portal a bit early in the offseason. When he comes back, they give them a pretty respectable duo. They don't have the depth like the interior D-line does. I'm kind of iffy on this overall defensive line and run defense for 2022. How are you feeling?
I'm a little iffy as well. I think Young's a talented player. He also had an interception last year, 2 pass breakups. I kind of like to see him be a renaissance man, do it all for this team on the defensive line. Yeah, and then Barron, like you said, he was interested in leaving. He ends up staying. He had 4 sacks last year, 7 tackles for loss, and 30 total tackles. I'd like to see him step that tackle total up a little bit, maybe get a little bit higher, close to the 50-60 range, so he can step up. This interior defensive line is solid. I think it's decent, but I just don't know if it's missing that star power that it probably would need to be an elite defensive line.
James Pierce, Joshua Joseph, they might see time early on, incoming 4 stars. D-line has potential, but it's not a unit that has opponents shaking in their boots. But, I'll see what happens because Tim Banks can certainly progress these guys. They have a nice defensive line coach as well. So, very optimistic about this unit, but I'm not overly, worried if I'm an opponent of Tennessee's. Looking at linebacker, though, I think this is a really interesting positional group. Jeremy Banks, a converted running back, he has shined at linebacker. Something about these offensive guys that convert to linebacker, and they do pretty good at their new position. 128 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss last year. Not bad for a guy who's still quite new to the position. This will be, I believe, his 3rd year now at linebacker. He's a physical player, still developing, so the mistakes he makes, he's made through the first 2 years, should certainly take a nice dip this year. We all forgot about Juwan Mitchell, the Texas transfer who led the team in tackles in 2020. Redshirt season ago, essentially. He was a starter in the first game of the year, played 2 more after that. I'm not sure what the full story was, but he only played 3 games on the year. Maybe they wanted to get him more comfortable with the system. I'm not sure. Maybe a Tennessee fan could let me know. But more importantly, he's going to be likely in the starting lineup this year. You look at Aaron Beasley. He had 84 tackles last year. Converted safety, also has that physical nature. So you also got Solon Page, a senior, who's going to provide depth. It's only a 4.25, so interested to see the role Beasley carves out this year. Him and Mitchell should probably battle for that starting job. Short term, Nick, they look good at linebacker. Long term for 2023, though, it's a big question mark because they're going to have a lot of guys depart. They haven't exactly recruited this under Josh Heupel.
Right now, this linebacking core is very solid. Banks, 11.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, interception, plus 4 pass breakups. Super talented guy, can do it all. I love the way that he's converting, kind of adjust position. And Beasley, really talented with the 2 fumble recoveries, plus 7.5 tackles last year and 1.5 sacks. I like where they are right now. I think these 2 linebackers are solid. And they fit really well in the 4-2-5. I think they both have a good command of the game. I think they're solid. And then you have Mitchell as well, who comes in, who could be a really solid player potentially, and also play partnering up with Banks if need be. I like this linebacking core. I think it's solid, but the future definitely is going to be interesting to see because the recruiting, like you said, is just very poor in this position, and I don't really know what the future plans are for the defense.
Plenty of time, of course, until the early signing day, so we'll wait to see what happens. But look at this pass defense. They really got torched last year, 122nd FBS, 273 yards per game allowed. They did snag 13 picks, but they also allowed 23 touchdowns. The team really struggled in all areas, it seemed, in the back end. They did make some good plays, which is evident by that many interceptions, but they do lose Theo Jackson, Alante Taylor. Get back a handful of guys I'm really excited for them. Kamal Hayden missed the spring, but he's a talent the staff seemed really high on. Warren Burrell, he should occupy the other cornerback spot. Wesley Walker, one of the top transfers from Georgia Tech. They lost a bunch of players. He was one of them. Tennessee got him. So I think that's a very solid addition. He was very impressive last year. 40-plus tackles for him in Atlanta. Both safeties, more importantly, though, in Trayvon Flowers and Jalen McCullough, they're seniors. They are back. Flowers, 82 stops. McCullough had 3 picks last year. I'm really not sure how to feel about this secondary because they only lose a handful of players. They weren't exactly great last year, but there's no one that's really screaming on paper elite talent that's going to change everything in the back end. I do think there's some intriguing prospects that we just named off, but how are you feeling here? I think they'll certainly improve because 122nd, you can't really get much worse, but how much better will they be is the real question.
When you look at the stat sheet, it looks like this was a good group on paper last year, but they just really didn't perform well considering they were 122nd in pass defense. I don't really know if there's room, as there could be improvement. I mean, they have to improve considering how low they were, but some of these guys, they return a lot of these guys. These guys have good experience. I like Flowers. I like Burnell. I think the 2 of them together are solid. I think they can have some serious potential. I like the way they picked up Walker in the portal as well. I just don't know if I really see a whole lot of improvement here. I think they'll continue to get torched this year through the air. I think teams will be able to notice that weakness and take advantage of it.
And that takes us to our schedule preview and predictions. Honestly, a pretty tough schedule, Nick. September 10th at Pittsburgh. They lost last year at home to Pitt. Of course, Joe Milton was the starter. A lot has changed since then. He overthrew everybody in that game. I remember where guys were running wide open against that Pitt defense, and, of course, Milton threw it into the stands. So I think this is going to be a game where you see a lot of yards through the air by both teams. These 2 secondaries really struggled last year. And will they be better this year? I think so, but in week 2, can you really bank on that? I'm not sure, especially when Pitt has one of the nation's top defensive lines. I think they're really going to tee off on this Tennessee O-line. That's still a really good football team. People aren't really high on Pitt this year because they don't really know a lot about Pitt. They return a lot of starters. They get back a lot of experience. I think they're going to do just fine. I think Pitt will win that game at home. All losses are winnable games, though, Nick. But to get to 10 wins or so, we're banking on immense improvement in some of the struggle areas we discussed. As much hype as this team has got, it's not like this roster possesses overwhelming talent. I'm not exactly high on it like other teams are. Of course, Hendon Hooker is great, and the tempo this offense possesses means all the games are winnable, like LSU, Alabama, Georgia. I just see them going 8-4 this year, which I think would be a success with wins over Kentucky and South Carolina. I mean, that's a lot better than where they were at 2 years ago, I'd say.
Right. I look at the schedule. I think it has some tough patches that really make it difficult for Tennessee. I look at that stretch September 24th to October 15th versus Florida at LSU versus Alabama. That's a brutal stretch there. And then you look at it October 29th to November 5th versus Kentucky at Georgia. That's also a tough stretch there. I think this is a solid team. I think 7 to 8 wins is kind of where they belong. I think that South Carolina will take care of them as well because I predicted South Carolina to win the SEC East, but I think they could beat LSU on a given Saturday, and I think they have the talent to beat to beat Kentucky by a wide margin or beat Pitt. But in general, this team's kind of right in that 8-4, 7-5 range, which is a solid season for Tennessee considering how it's been in the past. But I think Volunteer fans would like a little bit more, and considering the preseason hype they're giving their team, I think they'd expect a little bit more, but they're going to fall just short of those expectations this year. But this team's super exciting for the future.
The wheels could also fall off, though, Nick. We have 3 teams right here I have them beating: SC, Kentucky, Florida. They could easily lose as well. So I think the wheels could certainly fall off. I don't think they will, and I hope they don't because I'm very excited for this offense and for Tennessee. How do you feel? Because they could certainly miss a bowl game. It's very easy for that to happen, considering these are going to be some tough games that might really be close. It might come down to a few ball plays down in the fourth quarter. So, how do you kind of feel? What do you think their floor is, I should say?
Right, they certainly do get the benefit of the draw getting Florida and Kentucky at home. I think if those games are on the road, especially Florida, the Swamp's a brutal place to play, and Kentucky as well. Those fans are getting very excited for their team because they have such a great ball club out in Lexington. I definitely think it's possible they could lose to Kentucky, South Carolina, and Florida, and then they fall down to that close to 500 range. 500 in conference play, below 500 in conference play is really not what you want to see with the Kentucky team. Out of conference, getting Ball State, UT Martin, Akron, those are some free wins there. Playing Pitt's a bit gutsy out of conference considering how it went last year. This team could find themselves in trouble because for me, the only guaranteed wins on paper are Ball State, Akron, UT Martin, and Vanderbilt, and Mizzou. The rest of the games are a toss-up.
Yeah, I think Florida and Kentucky is really going to put some stress on the defensive line. I have faith in them, but we'll see what happens. I'm very interested to see the final result come December for this football team because it really could go either way, for the better or the worse. That's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Nick, as always, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.